Developing empathy for ourselves and others. And you may say, well, empathy, I have heard that empathy is, towards others. Why for ourselves? Because the thing is that sometimes we do not pay attention. We do not pay attention to those needs, which are extremely important. I don't know if you remember the famous. Okay, we're going to start recording now. Developing empathy for ourselves and others. You may remember when Gandhi said, "Be the change you wish to see in the world." And it all starts with us. And that also applies with empathy. It applies with how we feel, how we are inside. So with this, we will start now with the definition of what empathy is. According to Oxford Language, is the ability to understand and share the feelings of another. Understand and share. Now, Becca Borody, she gave this very powerful definition. She says, empathy is the ability to understand another person's thoughts and feelings in a situation. And look at this, so important, from their point of view. Because let's always keep in mind that not everybody has the same point of view as we do. So with this, you can see it from their own point of view rather than your own. That may be the challenging, right? But it is important. It differs from sympathy, where one is moved by the thoughts and feelings of another, but maintains an emotional distance. Okay? And that's why I wanted to also bring the definition of sympathy, that what we are going to start seeing just now. Look at this. This, I love this picture because it shows someone who is empathetic, someone who is paying attention to the needs of others. Okay, in this one, you see another person that cannot go in. I'm so sorry. Okay, so in this one, we see that the man is embracing the woman and he is just showing his affection, his empathy towards whatever she may be feeling. Okay, now what is sympathy on the other hand? According to Oxford Language, feelings of pity and sorrow for someone else's misfortune. According to skillsyouneed.com, and the article, when they talk about sympathy, it is sympathy or compassion. They call it as compassion, is feeling for the other person. Empathy is experiencing what they experience as if you were that person, albeit through the imagination. And I thought that was cute that they made that distinction, because in reality, we cannot really feel what the other person is feeling. Because how can we? Yes, we can imagine. However, that is something that we cannot really know. You know that some of you, well, most of you know that I work, one of my, the core of what I do is helping the bereaved, helping people who go through losses, who lose a loved one. And something that most of my clients would say that they like the least is when people say, I know how you feel. Because in reality, the intention is beautiful. They feel that they are there for you. However, we really do not know how the other person is feeling. But as they say here, we can imagine. Now, when we talk about sympathy, and that is something that we want to also pay attention to, most people dislike when others feel sympathy for them, because they do not want to feel that others are feeling pity. If they are going through a difficult situation, if they are going through, pain, they don't want others to say, poor her, or poor she, or poor what she's going through, because they do not want to play the victim role. They don't want others to feel pity for them. It is interesting because I was talking about this actually earlier with a client I had, and we were talking about the difference. It came up, the conversation, and I told her, "Wow, what a coincidence!" Because I would just be talking about empathy and sympathy later today. So as we were exploring, the topic, I was telling her that most people don't like that others, pity them, to feel sympathy. And I was reflecting on that. And I think now, before I say it, so we can explore it together, and when I finish the presentation, would you please write on the chat, what do you think makes people not wanting to feel that others feel pity for them? Why do you think that would happen? That other people don't like that? Because that's what they mainly say. No, I don't want others to say poor, or I don't want others to think that, this is terrible, what's going on. I was actually reflecting on that, and I thought that because when we feel others feel sympathy for us, that may imply that we are vulnerable, and we don't like that. We don't like to come across as vulnerable, knowing that that is human, knowing that that happens to all of us, knowing that we all are vulnerable. But the thing is that we don't want to show it. We want to appear this tough, this I can do everything. And in reality, our humanity comes across. I don't know if you have ever heard or read this lady, Brene Brown. Brene Brown, she talks a lot about vulnerability. And it's very powerful the way she talks, because what she says is that, many people, they feel vulnerable, but they do not want to show it because that would show some weakness. And in reality, what do you think is more weakness? To express how we really feel inside, that shows our humanity, or to pretend wearing the mask, not the mask to cover, not this mask, but the mask, to cover our real feelings and pretend that we are strong. What in reality is more powerful? So we want to make sure that when people feel for us, it's with a beautiful intention, okay? But I have noticed that many people, most people, I would say, based on my experience, do not like to feel that others feel pity for them, okay? Now, this would be the perfect image for that, no? The person may be crying, obviously, and then the lady, she must be a counselor, therapist, I imagine, she is handing on the Kleenex, the box of tissue, to her. When I saw this, I'm like, I'm going to share this, because something that we say, and even when I did a training with Baptist Hospital on how to, to train people, be facilitators of bereavement support groups, we would always tell them that something that we want to avoid when someone is crying is to hand on the box of tissue. Why do you think it's this? Because when people are crying, they are in the moment. They are expressing. They are just allowing all those tears come out. When we give them the box of tissue, we stop the flow. We stop the flow. So what I do, my practice, what I have is I have the box of tissue there. Or if the person starts crying or something and it's not there, I just get it, put it next, on the table next to them. I do not give it to them. So keep that in mind whenever you are with a person who may be crying. Some people do this, some other people bring a glass of water So with that, we interrupt the flow of the person who's crying, okay? But this would be, of course, a combination, we'll say empathetic and sympathetic, but the expression that she has in on her face, the lady, I tend to say that it's more sympathetic than empathetic. Now, another word that people may use with that instead of empathy is kindness, kindness. And then we are going to see the difference. This is from positivepsychology.com. And when a person is showing kindness, they smile, they do acts of goodwill, and they say positive words. When the person is being empathetic, is showing empathy, they consider from the things they consider from others' perspective. Remember what we said at the beginning. It's like when we say, like, if you got into another person's shoes, the same. So you consider others' perspectives. Active listening, it's a big one. Active listening is a big one because we want to pay attention to what the other person is saying. And sometimes what they are saying, not even with their words, with their body language, with their tone, they're sending the message. And if you are listening actively, you are getting all that information. Because remember, we are always communicating. Now, what about relating to each other? That has to do with empathy, that you can relate to the other person. Okay, so we can see the difference, no? Now, according to Daniel Goleman, I don't know if you have ever read any of his books. This is a psychologist, very well known, and he wrote the book Emotional Intelligence. Emotional intelligence that actually was a breakthrough in having to do with relationships. Because remember, and even for hiring people, because generally before, when hiring someone, companies, they would pay attention to the IQ, no, to the intelligence. Now, when he introduced the concept, the term of emotional intelligence, Goleman, what they did was that they paid attention to how people handle their emotions. So that is emotional intelligence, known as EI. Instead of IQ, it's EI, not emotional intelligence. And he has written so much about it. And then he says actually that empathy is one of those elements that have to do with emotional intelligence. And he says that we actually have different types of empathy. One would be cognitive empathy. And it's when we understand, and this may be challenging to some of us that may be set on our ways, that may think that the way I think is the way, not other way of thinking. Some of us that may say, well, if she doesn't agree with me, if he doesn't agree with me, I don't want to talk to them. Interesting, because sometimes we may say those things, right? We may forget that we are unique individuals and we have the right, and I want to use that word, we have the right to think and have beliefs that are ours. They may not be the same as other people, but they're ours. So when people they are cognitive, empathetic, they understand how people think and perceive the world, and they have some mental models. So that's why we want to start paying attention to ourselves, because when we talk about these things, and when I do this, I do it, most of you who know me, I do it with all my heart and doing the best to bring a message to you that we can always, learn, we can always get better, we can always reflect. on ourselves, because even when I am preparing these things, I love it because it's a way, that we continue learning, with all the research and all that, we continue learning. And that's what I do. I share it with you. So this would be cognitive empathy, according to Houben. Now, what about emotional empathy? Emotional empathy would be when we resonate with the other person at an emotional level. We resonate. It's when we say, we can understand the feelings of one another. Now, the empathic concern has to do with care about it and communicate well. And this is when we are, well, when people say, no, I have your back, that we support them, that we are with them all the way. That has to do with empathic concern. Couples tend to appreciate that. Couples, parents with children, children with parents, they appreciate that the other person has their back. So all these three have to do with empathy. It's like an umbrella, no? Empathy is an umbrella, and it has the different aspects of empathy. Now, this one has to do with the cognitive, no? Cognitive empathy, and it says, I understand how you think about things. I understand. You are able to take the other person's perspective. Now, the downside would be if only have cognitive empathy, that they can manipulate you. That is something that we also want to pay attention. Because if you only have that one, then the other person that thinks differently may take advantage of that, and they may manipulate you. Because one thing is taking the other person's perspective and understanding, but the other way is to change the way you are because of them. So we always want to pay attention. I would say that some leaders, in a way that leaders not in the right way, but that use some manipulation, they would apply some of these. Okay. Now, the emotional empathy is when you say to someone, I feel with you, that you see them, that they are distressed. I feel your distress. And we mean it. We feel it in our hearts. That there is another term that is known as empath. Empath is a certain type of people, say short percentage of the population, that they feel, according to them, because I know someone who's an empath, that she calls herself an empath, they feel way too much. They feel way too much. So that is not empathy, that's empath. But so it's when the distress of others gets into them, but way too much. So that will be a little different. But this one is that when we feel the distress. Now, someone who has emotionally empathy, that's critical for leadership. If you want to be a good leader, someone that touches hearts, emotional empathy is key there, because it helps to create rapport, but I would say rapport as well with others. Okay, so I don't know if there, because this is copied as it says there from that website, I don't know if there was a typo or not, that they used report instead of rapport. However, that creates rapport between two people, no, or the leader and the masses, no, the group of people that they want to lead. Now, downside, dealing with pain, you can burn out. That's the thing, that when it is a lot of dealing with the stress from others, then, and that's why you can burn out. And that's why when we talk about caregivers, when caregivers give so much of themselves, they can get burnout. Okay. And we call even those things as compassion overload. And you feel that it's way too much. That's why we want to always pay attention to our emotions. We want to always pay attention that if when we are taking care of another person or paying attention to the distress of others, we may not be not taking care of our own. Always pay attention to that, okay? And something that is extremely important in emotion empathy is emotional self-management. And you would say, Ligia, what is that issue of, emotional self-management? Well, that's when we are able to manage our emotions. We are able to manage our emotions because emotions are emotions. They happen, they're there. What we do with emotional intelligence and with self-management, we know and we learn to manage our emotions so the emotions do not control us, okay? Now, this with empathic concern felt sense when you see others' pain. You felt, no? Spontaneously, you want to help out. It's like when you are very caring and you can hear that from people and say, I care so much for others. Yes, I can totally identify with that because, I feel a lot, and I love to care for others. Actually, I love it. And then it's important also, but let me tell you, being like that, I always pay attention to my needs. I always pay attention that I am also empathetic with myself. And we're going to be talking about that in a little while. Now, empathic, care also makes people that they are good team players. So they can work in a team and as a team. Okay, that is valuable for organizations. For organizations, when people can work as team, they're good team players. Being able to experience empathy, care, and concern has a great value there. Now, what is the difference between compassion and empathy, which is another word? And I wanted to show this book to you. Awesome. It's a great book. And it's empathy, why it matters and how to get it. It's written by Roman Snake. Don't you know the last name? Where is that from? It sounds like maybe Russian, but the book is awesome.
How can
And he says this: the Latin origin of the word compassion means to suffer with another. Isn't that interesting? To suffer with another. Oh, I want to tell you, remember with empathy and sympathy, the word pathy comes from the word pathos. That means emotion. Okay, pathos means emotion. Okay, but in this one, the Latin origin of compassion is to suffer with another. This is different from empathy, which can include sharing the joys of another. So it is not limited to suffering as compassion, but also, to share joy. In addition, the emphasis in compassion is on affective connection with others, feeling their emotions, and does not usually include making a cognitive leap to understand how their beliefs, experiences, and views might be different from our own. So that is mainly the difference between compassion, being compassionate and being empathetic. Okay, and notice that here with empathy, the cognitive aspect has to do a lot with it. Now, what about self-empathy? What about self-empathy? According to, and this is an article that these two ladies, these are PhDs, Lidwich Nisnik and Catherine Train, they said, the first step to empathy is self-empathy. Remember when we started that I said, as Gandhi said, be the change you wish to see in the world. It all starts with us. So self-empathy, the first step to empathy is that, to be empathetic with ourselves. But when you are feeling challenged and misunderstood yourself, empathizing with someone else is difficult. And that's why it starts with us. In order to pay attention to others' needs, emotional needs, it's important that you understand yourself first. You know that it's been said that we cannot give what we do not have. So always it starts with us. If you are not aware of your inner experience and emotional and mental state, how can you be sure that which you perceive to be part of the other is not rather a projection of your own self upon them? And that is something, just that phrase. How can you be sure that that which you perceive to be part of the other is not rather a projection of your own self upon them? This sometimes happens. And that is what we call in psychology like a mirror, the mirror effect. You know, that we see in others something that we are projecting. It's been said actually that sometimes what bothers the most from another person may be a projection of what we like the least of ourselves. Okay, so it's important to always go in, reflect, go in and think what is making you feel that way. What is making you feel that way? So, because then that way you can understand yourself. Well, here's sharing. I'm going to share something with you that is very close to my heart. And I was sharing that I was writing about grief. Well, I finished it. Last Sunday. Very happy. And that they had the greatest value.
Audio, something's happening to your audio.
I took the time as I was writing the book to reflect a lot about myself, to understand, especially because it's grief. No, and I was going, still, but going through the grief of my mother, and to understand myself, to reflect, to go in, because what I say and I share with you, I also do it myself. Because if I wouldn't do it myself, I wouldn't be able to understand when you do it as well. So it is really, really important. Now, that is why the first step towards empathizing with someone else is to empathize with yourself. This is according to Barrett Leonard, 1997. This lady's quoted that phrase from that source. Now, see what Louise Hay had to say. Remember, you have been criticizing yourself for years and it hasn't worked. Try approving of yourself and see what happens. When I read this quote, I thought that it had to do actually with being empathetic with ourselves. Because when we are criticizing ourselves, when we are blaming ourselves, when we are judging ourselves, are we being empathetic? Are we really getting in touch with how we are feeling? Instead of going in and asking ourselves, what made me do that? What made me say that? There must have been an emotion there. And maybe because of blaming and criticizing yourself, you don't get in touch with that emotion. That's why when I saw that quote, I'm like, absolutely. This has to do totally with empathy. So always remember, okay, that you want to stop criticizing yourself and be open to connect with your inner emotions. And just as we said with others, be cognitively empathetic. Instead of saying, why did you say that? Why did you think that way? You are so dumb, or, that you are thinking that way and you are behaving that way. No. Understand yourself. Where are you coming from? Because if you do not go there cognitively to your thoughts and you don't pay attention, say, well, to understand your thinking process, then how in the world can you be empathetic? So the same way that you want to be empathetic with others, you want to be empathetic with yourself at a cognitive level, at an emotional level, at a caring level. Okay? Look at this. So that image, and of course, I love that image. If you will, could you please just take a look at that image? Just take a look. And you may want to write it on the chat, or when you come together as a group to share it. What does this image say to you? How does it speak to you? I don't know if you are, visual, but when I see something images, I like it because I get a message out of an image, So that's what they say, that a picture is more powerful than 1,000 words, paraphrasing the quote. But just pay attention at what is this saying to you. What did Greg Lawrence says about our heart? Listen to your heart. He says, stop, be still, listen to your heart and the love you have for self and others, and know your truth. Put aside the seduction of the mind and the glamour of this or that option, and truly listen to you, yourself. You will know the essence of truth when you allow your spirit to be. Isn't that this beautiful? Isn't this an amazing quote? Beautiful. Now that I said this, I'm going to check some books, other things that he has written. Also, he was, write so powerful and so spiritual. But it is true. We want to listen to our hearts. Sometimes we don't pay attention to what our heart is saying to us. And we want to do this, okay? So I thought that this was a beautiful quote, and that has to do, of course, tremendously with empathy. Now, what does self-empathy involve? Self-empathy involves developing self-awareness, to be aware of ourselves, to develop self-awareness as we observe a part of ours who behaves in certain ways. So we want to know that. We want to be aware. We don't want to just say, well, I did this or I behaved this way. I don't even know what I did it, but I did it. That's not self-awareness. We are just going automatic. So you want to take the time and go in and just pay attention and be aware what is making you behave in certain ways. We do not judge or blame ourselves. We just observe. And when we say this, you may recognize some elements here of mindfulness. If you have ever done a mindfulness training, or if you have ever applied this practice. As John Kabat-Zinn said, the creator of MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction, he said that just paying attention, not judging ourselves, just observe, It is about developing the ability of knowing ourselves. And this is where it all starts. The more we know ourselves, the more we can understand ourselves, the more aware we are of how we feel. Now, remember that I mentioned her before, Brene Brown. She is an amazing lady. And there she wrote a book, really good. This book, she's coming up around with another one. I don't remember the name, or maybe it's out already. But this one that I'm going to mention to you is really good. is she writes very direct and empowering. And the name of the book is Rising Strong. Rising Strong. I have it here. I'm going to show it to you. Because I am at my home's office, so I have books here. I have books in my office. I love books. I know that some ladies there, they know I'm talking because they love books as well. Okay, so here's the book: Rising Strong, The Reckoning, The Rumble, The Revolution. Great book. Okay, so and she's the lady who I was saying before at the beginning, that she talks about vulnerability, not being vulnerable. She talks a lot about shame. So she has great talks on TED Talk, if you're interested, to follow her, no? And what did she say about empathy? She says, empathy is simply listening, holding space, withholding judgment, emotionally connecting, and communicating that incredible healing message of you are not alone. That when I read that, I'm like, this is so beautiful, because she has a TED Talk, I believe, or maybe a podcast I heard somewhere, where she talks about loneliness, and that's something that affects us, of course, if we feel like that. However, when we have someone, one person, that can listen to us, and they hold the space for us to be who we are, to say whatever we want to say, that we can feel whatever we want to feel, and we can connect at an emotional level. That's empathy. And as much as we love to feel that ourselves, it is beautiful that we also give that to others. Okay? Now, this is another quote that I liked a lot, and this is from Audrey Hepburn. You may remember her, Audrey Hepburn. Remember My Fair Lady? She was such a beautiful woman, so fine, beautiful, special woman. And she said this: as you grow older, you will discover that you have two hands, one for helping yourself, the other for helping others. She mentions that. One for helping yourself. She didn't say you have two hands to help others. No, because we want to help ourselves. We want to be empathetic with ourselves, not only being empathetic with others, but it starts with us, to just, to hold ourselves and stay still and give ourselves that love that we appreciate that much. Okay? Sometimes people expect others to give them the empathy, the understanding, the love, not paying attention that they can start doing it themselves. Okay? So I liked that quote as well, because it also shows what empathy has to do. Now, there are some things that we can practice to become more empathetic, because then you may say, well, okay, we talk about empathy. How can I be more empathetic? Or maybe you say, Ligia, I am totally that way. I am totally empathetic. However, remember, we can always get better. We are never finished learning. The moment you hear someone saying, well, I learned about everything I had to learn in this life, I'm done. Well, really, we never stop learning. I saw it in my mom. She was 100, my centenarian. She never stopped learning. And I'm not only saying learning things, no. I am saying learning at an emotional level, learning, understanding other points of views. I saw it in her. And it is beautiful because we can be more empathetic. The older we get, as Audrey Houben said, the more empathetic we may become. So we are not done, learning how to be. So these are some practices I thought could help you to be more empathetic. One, of course, listen attentively. Please, no phones. No phones. This is great. It's awesome. However, when you are with someone, when you want to be empathetic with another human being, you want to avoid distractions. And phones are a distraction. Either talking, either texting. So phones aside. Now, ask people how they are, how they are feeling. Do not assume. If you see someone crying, if you see someone quiet, do not assume that they are sad or that they are worried or bored. Or ask, be curious about how they are feeling. Because when we ask, what are we showing? When we ask someone, how are you feeling? What are we showing to them? Now, the other thing that we can do is consider other people's situations and imagine how it may feel to them. When I wrote that, I was thinking, and you may remember last week that we were talking about when we were dealing with difficult people, that if you are in line to the supermarket and someone is complaining, that, and maybe the cashier, it may happen to you. It has happened to me. That maybe you are paying, in the supermarket, in Publix, wherever, and the cashier has an attitude. The cashier is not giving a smile, it's just saying hello, good morning, and she doesn't even respond. Well, sometimes they are going through something. And I said last time that when we are working with clients and services, we should always keep our personal things at bay, so not to bring them to work. However, there are times, and I'll be specific, when we lose a loved one, there are times when in reality, it's to be understanding, it's to be empathetic, and to consider other people's situations, if they lost their job. When we are talking about transitions, which are difficult and painful, so you know what, to give people a break also. And then to consider them and imagine how hard it must be for them, how hard it must be for them. So this is something that you want to continue doing, okay? And then, of course, open your heart to develop more empathy. Oh, wow. Open your heart to develop more empathy. Because when we open our hearts, we can totally understand one another. Because when we open our hearts, we allow our emotions to flow. You'll see, okay, we allow our emotions to flow and to me. So these are things that we can do, and we totally allow ourselves to be more giving with others and more empathetic. Okay, so it's up to us if we open our hearts to develop more empathy. Okay, and now remember, being self-empathetic, be self-compassionate, and love yourself. I ask you, how many times have you ever hugged yourself? To really hug yourself and just give that love. Look at that picture. Isn't that a beautiful expression of this woman? So that's why I wanted to leave you with that image in mind. Remember, be self-empathetic, be self-compassionate, and love yourself.